This is Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. Today we're talking with the founder of Tru Bru Coffee, Nick Kassouf. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I am your host for the show. So glad to have you along. You can look up all of the episodes of Keys to the Shop. There's over 820 or something around there that have been published over 7 years. You can search all of the topics if you are subscribed to the show in your podcast player. You can look up things like management, leadership, barista work, business development, our Founder Friday episodes. I would encourage you to get subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts. And also, don't forget to share these episodes with people on social media, especially when you hear something that really resonates. Chances are it's going to really help somebody else as well. So sharing is caring, as they say. So thank you very much, everybody, for doing that. Quickly, I want to also mention that Keys to the Shop has been nominated for a Sprudgie Award over at sprudge.com. So a huge thank you to all of you who nominated the show. And now it's time for voting, since Keys to the Shop is a finalist. If you do want to cast your vote for Keys to the Shop for Best Coffee Podcast over at sprudge.com/vote. And if that's you and you're going to do that, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's been such a pleasure to serve all of you through this show. You know, coming up soon is the next round of key holder coaching groups. Keys to the Shop is also a consulting company. So Keys to the Shop Consulting as a service has been historically one-on-one coaching with coffee shop owners and operators to help them really build a thriving cafe, really build a thriving business, whether you're just starting out or want to learn how to mindfully scale, base those decisions on values, and take your coffee shop to the next level. And one of the services that has come from this, through all these conversations I've had with so many people over the years as clients, is this need for community, because ownership can be kind of a lonely thing. And that's why key holder coaching groups exist. First one launched last year. It has been going so well, and I want you to have the opportunity to join also. This is a mastermind group. It is a peer-to-peer coaching group where you gather with other coffee shop owners, and each person gets an opportunity to get the insight and input from the group on various issues that they're going through in their cafes. And it really is about encouragement, accountability, insights, and fellowship with other people going through the same kinds of things you are going through as an owner. So if you're interested in getting access to the application, having conversation about whether this is the right fit for you at this time, to be a part of the Key Holder Coaching Group's second round here, starting in March, email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS@keystotheshop.com. You know, it's really exciting when you get to see coffee change for the better, when new technology comes out that actually allows coffee to be elevated and for baristas and operators to offer their customers something truly amazing that is next level. That is the Ground Control Brewer. Ground Control launched many years ago with their Cyclops brewer and has taken the world by storm. SCA award-winning technology allows ultimate control over extractions of batch brew and concentrates for batch iced lattes and cold brew. They have a new brewer out now that is actually smaller than the first, but actually has a 30% higher volume for batch espresso and cold brew concentrate. It's also cloud connected to a smart dispenser that tracks all your brewing data. So you got the concentrates for iced lattes, you've got the 8-minute cold brew, and just next level batch brew coffee. This is the kind of machine I think you should look at getting in your shop. You go to groundcontrol.coffee to learn more information, talk to the folks over there, and see about getting this in your shop. Again, that's over at groundcontrol.coffee. If you're looking for amazing plant-based beverages, I don't think you need to look any further than the Barista Series from Pacific. The Barista Series is created for baristas and is approved by baristas all over the world. I mean, professional competition-level baristas that actually test the product before it gets sent to all of these coffee shops. This is why, over the years, Pacific has really been the go-to gold standard for plant-based beverages. They actually do perform on bar. And that means it stands up to the heat from steaming. It produces great texture for latte art. It also keeps the balance of the final drink focused on coffee. Your customers are going to really love this. Go check them out at pacificfoodservice.com and get samples. Try it for yourself. Again, if you're looking for the best plant-based beverages for your shop, then I think it needs to be the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, I'm really excited to be here with you and to share this episode where we are having the Founder Friday episode for January 2024 with Nick Kassouf, who is the founder of Tru Bru Organic Coffee, as well as Humbowl Juice Bar. And this is in Orange, California. Actually, Tru Bru's been, it's 10 years now since it was founded in 2014. So this is the 10-year anniversary of Tru Bru Organic Coffee. Nick, like I mentioned, also owns Humbowl Juice Bar, which has been in operation for 5 years. And in all of this 10-year period, this is the kind of endeavor that really keeps you busy. And all of it is for the purpose of helping people thrive in community, to slow down and enjoy coffee, enjoy life, enjoy one another in the midst of it. And that really is what powers Nick, as a professional in this industry. And that's what we're going to get into today, going through the various stages of his career, getting into coffee, origins and all of that, and then how he drew inspiration from the coffee industry to create a people-first culture for both the staff and the customers at Tru Bru. We're going to talk about the challenges and the different pivots that were made in the first year and then multiple years from there, expansion and what it means to scale responsibly and also keep the integrity of your business intact. And also, we talk about leading yourself and other people in how we can prevent toxicity and maintain a healthy culture as we grow a business and serve our communities. And Nick has such a great heart for people. He's a consummate professional. And this conversation was such a pleasure to have. So I hope you're really inspired by the insights shared here on this Founder Friday. Without anything else from me, let's get right to it. Here now is the Founder Friday interview with Nick Kassouf of Tru Bru Coffee. Nick, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
Hey, Chris. Hey, thanks for having me on here. I'm doing pretty well, actually.
Oh, good. I'm really interested in your story, obviously. This is why you're on the show. And I'm pretty sure you were in the coffee industry before starting your own coffee bar. I'm wanting to kind of start by exploring your history as a participant in the coffee industry before starting Tru Bru. I get to see you around at Coffee Fest, and folks see you around the industry quite often. And your business it's a beautiful cafe and roastery. I think that didn't happen by accident. You've got a pretty solid plan for what you want to accomplish through Tru Bru. So what was the genesis of this for you in the early days prior to launching?
Yeah, you are right. I was working in coffee before we opened Tru Bru, but I would say it was more as a high school sort of college job where it was kind of something I was doing more just as a sort of income stream. Back in those days, coffee wasn't as specialty as it is now. I remember distinctly in those early days where nobody really did latte art. It was not as much care put into pulling great shots of espresso. And I don't think it was just the shop that I was at, but I think more of an industry thing. There was less attention to detail. This was probably 15, 16 years ago. I remember it was funny because at one of those first jobs, I had a manager who got very upset at me for trying to spend time to learn how to pour a heart.
Oh,
yeah. And I was basically just trying to step up our game. And I'm the type of person who wants to push themselves to do whatever I'm doing better. I got reprimanded for trying to pour latte art. And back then, it took months to learn how to pour a heart because there was no resources and, you're teaching yourself. But nowadays, it's like, you could teach somebody in 10 minutes. But, that was a different time.
That's funny. You just remind me of so many stories I've heard of people getting in trouble for latte art, myself included, where it feels like later on. In fact, I went back to the coffee shop, recently, and I told the baristas who were doing latte art, I was like, when I worked here 20 years ago, I got in trouble for this. Yeah.
Yep. Different times.
You're pouring your heart into it, and they didn't like that. So, from that point on, obviously you didn't get dejected from the coffee industry as a result. You were just wanting to continue to do this at some level.
Yeah. So with the founding of our store and our company, it was more of a family origin where my mom wanted to open a cafe. She had owned one previously in Canada. My parents are immigrants from Brazil. And actually, coffee kind of runs even further back in our family history, because back in the 50s, my grandparents immigrated from Lebanon to Brazil. And back then, my grandma was actually like the little roaster in her town in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And it was like in those days having like a little metal sort of cylinder thing with a handle where you would literally like roast the beans over the fire. Yeah, exactly. It's funny because it brings back this memory where when we first opened our cafe and we had a little roaster in the shop and we were getting trained by the technician on how to use it. I recall my grandma mentioning something about like roasting till you heard like the second pop or crack or whatever she said. And I was just thinking in my head, like, wow, that's crazy. My grandma knows, like, you know, she used to roast a second crack, I guess, back in like the 50s in Brazil. But it's interesting. So that kind of history is there, where whether it was from coffee or owning a cafe in Canada and having that familial history in the hospitality industry, that's kind of how this came about in 2014, was the new genesis of that kind of next adventure in our family's history.
So was it you and your family together that kind of planned out what Tru Bru would be? How did that work out?
Yeah, it was pretty much a collaboration, mostly between my mom and I. She was sort of the one that worked in hospitality, whether that was hotels or owning her own cafe. And I was in college studying business at the time. I think I was 22. And we kind of worked together to bring about Tru Bru. It was obviously her finances. I obviously didn't have any money at the time. And she had sold her small business that she had, took those funds and basically went headfirst into trying to open a shop here in California.
Okay, so in that next step of starting this shop, and you're in Orange, California, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you drew on the inspiration from your family and coffee, but you're also drawing from the inspiration, obviously, of what the market is going to respond to in coffee as well. So you're not roasting coffee the same way, right?
Nope.
And coffee is obviously modernized, and you launched in 2014. So at that point, the peers in the industry are reaching kind of like a fever pitch with the ubiquity of Stumptowns and Intelligentsias and things like that. So what did you draw from the greater industry that became a part of what you wanted to do with Tru Bru at the time?
I guess I would say I had multiple inspirations. One was from my previous employment and learning what not to do and how to level up what a cafe should be and what coffee should be. So I had a sort of negative enforcement that helped me know what not to do. And then I would say I drew on things like Intelligentsia, Blue Bottle, Stumptown. Those were kind of the early pioneers in the, I guess, specialty coffee space. They were kind of the first ones, at least I was aware of, who were really starting to take things more seriously and leveling up the sort of methods of brewing coffee, roasting coffee in a, more intentional way. And so I remember being pretty inspired by some talks I had heard from the founders of Intelligentsia, or like reading Blue Bottle's book and visiting Blue Bottle locations up north. Those were all kind of, I guess, very influential things, but also even just taking inspiration from like the Starbucks of the 90s and sort of that philosophy of like having a third place or a third home. And that was something we really put as a forward mission in our business, was creating a very comfortable place that people would call home. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's led to our success, was putting a big emphasis on like a people first, hospitality heavy business model. And I think that really helped us stand out.
Okay. So when you put an emphasis on that and you want to not be like what you experienced as a barista, what kind of planning goes into that? So we talk about this on the show actually a lot. We talk about people first systems and being, hospitable and having that be sort of the differentiator. In fact, that's, I think, what your tagline, correct me if I'm wrong, is fostering human connection. That's part of your mission statement, right?
Yep. We have a little like 2-word saying where it's known and nourished. And that's kind of like a little simplified version of our philosophy, where it's our goal to nourish you with quality food and drink, but also to come to know you and to build a space for you to feel known and appreciated. So,
wow, that's rich. That's awesome. I love that. When you plan a business around something like that, it can stop easily at the intention. That's what we want. That's on the t-shirt. What are the practical ways that in the first, let's say, year of launching your shop, you got the equipment, you got the menu, we're going to make lattes this temperature. there's the mop closet, and we're going to build out the bar this way. But when it comes to the main goal, what did you do to make sure that that was baked in from the beginning?
I think that really comes down to hiring and finding the right people who will embody the mission that you have. It's a hard thing to train when you put hospitality and relationship as the forward proposition that you're trying to achieve. And for that, you really need to have the raw materials to begin with, meaning you need to hire the people who are capable of accomplishing that sort of mission. You can train technicalities usually, like how to pull a shot of espresso, but you can't train genuine human connection. At least it's not easy in my experience.
That's true. Yeah. And while you can't train genuine human connection, you also can't, well, I say can't, but obviously you can. I'm curious what you do to do that is how do you identify people that can connect in that way? Maybe it's easier for you today, almost 10 years later. You're coming up on your 10-year anniversary pretty soon, which is awesome. What do you look for in a person to make that leap and say, yes, you're the type of person I can see that will help us accomplish this?
Yeah, in the early days, it was more touchy-feely, you're kind of guessing. I would be lying if I said I had some sort of magical system that could identify that. But now we have refined our hiring process where we've kind of learned to better spot people who are genuine in their customer service and empathetic sides that sometimes don't come out easily in interview questions. I actually hired a consultant to help refine our hiring process. He kind of taught me a new way of interviewing people, a new way of sort of trying to dive into discovering genuine characteristics of individuals you're considering to hire.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what made the big difference?
The way I learned it was that it was something called behavioral based interviewing. And what that did was shift from trying to just ask generic questions, like maybe how do you handle stress, or what would you do if a customer was rude to you? Some hypothetical generic interview questions that I used early on just because I didn't know, to going into more experiential, like story-based interviews where I actually asked the candidates to tell me about stories from their personal experience, whether it's their previous job or a school or some actual experience. And I basically tell them that they can take time to recall a certain event. And what ends up happening is they typically will talk to you for 4 or 5 minutes telling you a story. And it really lowers their guard to trying to curate what they're saying. And so you'll get more genuine information out of them. And you'd be surprised how many times people will tell you things that are unflattering that in a certain setting they probably would have never said it, but because they were in a conversation telling you a story, they will divulge that information. And so you get a more genuine, holistic picture of who that candidate is. And I feel like that's been a helpful tool for us in trying to hire people who fit our culture and our mission.
I'm a big fan of that. That is huge because obviously these are people you're going to be working with day in and day out under stress. Stressful situations happen no matter how well the coffee shop is set up. And it is actually set up for stress. There's this commercial that I keep seeing on like YouTube Shorts or something. It's a guy trying to like sell you a bike helmet, and he's demonstrating the toughness of his bike helmet by throwing a bike helmet onto like a steel rebar or something. And these bike helmets are just like cracking everywhere, but his helmet does not crack. It does not budge a bit. And everyone in the comments is saying, hey, bike helmets are built to break, to distribute the force of the impact so you don't splatter your brains or like get traumatic brain injuries. And so I'm just thinking like, yeah, there is a designed element of a cafe that has to distribute stress. It's just part of it. And I guess having the right people is the best way to ensure that it's going to be handled well, because it's going to happen. So in the first year that you set this up, you might have a lot of high expectations for what's going to happen. And I'm curious, what did happen and what was the reception like? And maybe talk about maybe some of the challenges that you needed to overcome early on, what you and your team experienced in that first year.
Definitely in the early days, we kind of had no clue what we were doing. It was a lot of trial and error type stuff. And I'd be lying if I, told you that we were just like magically great right from the beginning. There was a definite process of refining and figuring out who we wanted to be as a company. And I also think that in the early days, a lot of things are easier in the sense that, at least for me, it was a smaller scale, a smaller pace. and I was there every day in the cafe. And so it's a bit easier to lead a team or to have your brand play out in the way that you envision it when it's you and a handful of other people doing all the work. And it definitely is not a good way to, I would say, structure your business. You don't want to, I don't think necessarily build it completely around yourself early on, because that will create logistical problems later. But in that first year, there was a lot of trial and error, but it was more me figuring out what to do, what not to do when it comes to staffing, building a team, approaching customers, and curating a menu. It was difficult in that sense, but it was easier in the sense that it was easy to pivot. The company was small and communication was easy to get by with our team.
Yeah. What kind of pivots are you talking about, that maybe some significant things that you said, oh, well, we're going to have to change this because people aren't responding to it well, or maybe it's not that people were mad, it's just it's not resonating very well?
I don't think there was anything too crazy in terms of like from a customer facing side, but I think logistically internally, there were things that we didn't realize were not feasible. For example, we're like an organic company, so we source all organic coffees. A lot of our foods are organic. Our baked goods, we bake all in-house. One of the things that we didn't realize is just how expensive doing all organic could be. And so in that early day, we tried to source like all organic heirloom spelt flour for our pastries and certain types of sugars and whatnot. And we kind of realized not too long in that this is like completely unsustainable in terms of costs. And so we had to sort of refine back some of the things and kind of more carefully choose what we were going to do as like the primary organic ingredients that we used, just in order to be able to sell things at a reasonable rate. We didn't want to be like overly expensive to our community. So we kind of found a middle ground of where we could happily say that, we're selling you a great quality product, but at an affordable price, and not, something that's completely unrealistic.
You say you're a heavy organic company, and obviously that's an important part of what you do. It's still part of what you would read on the website about what you do. And at the same time, you had to, I almost don't want to use the word compromise, but it might have felt like that at the time because you were being a purist to your ideals. And how did you personally, or as a group of leaders, overcome some of that, if you felt it at all? Like, no, like then we're not being true to our name and organic. If we don't do it this way, then that's false. Is a perfectionism, I suppose, in the practice of your ideals. Is there a middle ground? What's the balance there?
There is a middle ground, because on one hand, you're right, it is difficult to sort of give up that purist mindset. And I would say my mom from many, many years ago, like in the early days of Whole Foods, where they had, way less locations, organic wasn't as popular. I had family members that would come over for Thanksgiving dinner type of thing and make fun of my mom for buying like all this organic stuff. This is like over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it was very difficult for her to sort of let go of having to do every single thing, organic. But at the same time, we kind of came to realize that, look, if we want to survive as a business and be a good source of food, product, drink, place for our community, then we need to find a sustainable business model. And so the alternative was either we keep doing 100% organic, raise our prices a ton, and exclude a lot of our community, or we can scale back some of the things that were just not available, at least at the time, in a wholesale way for organics, and make it accessible to our community. And in that way, we would still bring genuinely great products, but in a more curated way, where we still have all our organic flours and eggs and sugars and stuff, but not necessarily like every single down to the last ingredient, vanilla extract or something has to be organic. So we kind of chose what was realistic, and we let go of what was not.
Wow. We chose what was realistic and let go of what was not. That feels like if all of us just applied that across the board in our lives, that's like a life lesson right there. That's perfect. When I think about you starting this cafe in the midst of the industry, where it was, everybody is thinking about growth. And I believe you started as a roaster right out of the gate, right?
Yeah, we kind of dived headfirst into every aspect of the business, which also is not necessarily an advisable thing, but somehow we made it work surprisingly. But yeah, we started off roasting, baking, doing our kitchen, doing our bar, basically everything we tried to do in-house. And it makes for a difficult to scale model, but it did, luckily work out for us. But it is a tricky thing to do because you have to wear many hats as the owner.
And on the idea of growth, it feels like because you're doing all those things, you have ideas for what growth and success looks like in each individual area of your business. What is the ROI or for baking your own stuff and roasting? Like your cafe is just the only account for your roasting at first, and then you have other accounts that you grow from there. And then there's the cafe itself. How did you imagine growth looking for the business and maybe even in those individual areas?
Yeah, I think early on there was less of a long-term growth plan. It was more, how can we make this cafe as successful as possible? And how can we make this as good of a business as it can be? And so a lot of thought was just put into that one store and not necessarily growing a company in a more broader sense. And so now in the last few years, as we've pivoted to opening more locations, opening a roastery, bakery type thing, we've had to deal with logistical problems of the previous years of focusing so much onto one store that it wasn't built with scalability in mind. And so now this is like playing cleanup now, where you're trying to retroactively streamline a lot of the systems in your business for growth when initially you completely ignored those things.
Okay, so at what point did you find yourself looking at the business as a whole and maybe even those individual components and saying, this is working? And what did you look at that made you think that?
I think it's a mixture of customer feedback and then also just numbers of sales. Like if you look at how many, say, pastries we sold last year, it's quite a lot. It's quite impressive. A huge chunk of our revenue, say, came from pastries. And when you see customers come in ordering, dozens of pastries, requesting private orders of your product, then there's a very receptive audience for it. And so that's when you start to think in your head, well, I have a potential business here in itself, like you were alluding to. This is kind of its own business that properly nurtured and marketed and structured, you could potentially have a whole separate business of being a bakery. And the same thing applies to roasting coffee. When you have restaurants or hotels reaching out that they want to carry your coffee, something clicks in your head like, oh, this is a whole separate business. How can I make this work? And unfortunately, at the time, we had tons of potential opportunity, but no ability to fulfill that opportunity until very recently when we actually finally opened our own roasting facility and bakery, sort of a commissary where we now make all our baked goods and roast all our coffee in a central place.
And so now you can say yes to those things. Did that also help you with your wholesale?
Yeah, it was basically impossible before, at least in California, to do much wholesale because we didn't have a way to properly roast in volume at our store. It was all very small batch, micro roasted for our store. In our Las Vegas location, going back a couple of years, we were able to take on some wholesale because we had a bigger roaster there. But unfortunately, for years, we were very hamstringed by not being able to actually scale up because of the fact that we were micro roasting in the cafe.
Now, you just mentioned your second cafe in Las Vegas and the idea that, you've got two locations, they're both in different cities. It's really interesting to me. So talk a little bit about how many years was it in the Orange store where then the opportunity in Las Vegas presented itself and you actually, like, what went into saying yes to something like that? You must have really worked out some systems to make you feel the freedom that this also could work and we need to take this opportunity.
So the Vegas store was kind of a extension of the whole familial business thing where I have some family out there. So my sister and her husband actually live out there. And for years, they had been coming to California regularly to visit us for, every holiday and whatnot. And they love Tru Bru. And they would constantly say, hey, we really need a Tru Bru out in Vegas, Henderson area. There's nothing out there. And, maybe 3 or 4 years of that over and over. And one day in 2020, actually, interestingly enough, we signed our lease on that location the day before COVID fully hit and everything locked down. So it was very interesting timing. We were quite worried, to say the least.
So you opened during the pandemic, or at least you tried to open during the pandemic in Las Vegas. I mean, did it just exist as a lot of cafes existed? Did you go ahead with the open, but just as a curbside iteration and then build up from there?
Yeah, we ended up opening, I think, in 21, and some of the restrictions had sort of lifted. So we were able to operate kind of in a restricted way. But it was interesting opening a brand new location in a brand new state with COVID kind of still in full force. So that was a logistical and economic thing to get over. But, we made it through, and now we're about 2 years into that store, and it's doing really well, thankfully. And it's been received in a sort of equally successful way by the community there, even though it was a new area. Not a lot of people knew us by name. And I think a lot of the same principles we applied originally, putting hospitality and quality products as sort of like just a center principle for the business, it's sort of a universal thing that I think no matter where we kind of drop ourselves, if you can execute those two things well, then I think people will come, people will like your company, and they'll become regulars. And that's kind of what we've seen in the Las Vegas store.
Yeah, there's the cheat code right there. So roasting obviously is one of the cornerstones of your business, and there's a lot of ways to roast coffee. And so how would you characterize your roasting early on in terms of the way that you wanted it to be perceived by the customer? And really, has much changed? I mean, maybe talk about sourcing and roasting and how that's evolved over the years.
Yeah, in the early days, I was really trying to draw inspiration from like an Italian espresso. And so I did research and the sort of origins that people use in Italy to kind of curate their espresso blends. And I kind of copied that. And I would say that in general, we have a more rounded approach to roasting. So I don't hyper focus on light roast coffees. While I do have, quite a few light roast Ethiopians and other varieties, I would say that we're not dogmatic about it. We do have, our medium, our dark roast. And I'm more in the sense that I want to, again, focus on my customer and creating something that's really welcoming to a range of people. And so when 70% of your audience enjoys like a darker roasted coffee, I'm completely okay delivering that to them. I'm not like principled in the sense of being completely against dark roast coffees or anything like that.
Yeah. So the principle of being a well-rounded roaster and offering something for everybody is something that I'm glad to see is a little bit more popular today, that lots of roasters of reputation, and yourself included, are embracing this because it's something that people enjoy and they always have enjoyed. And everybody has always seen I would say almost everybody has always seen some of the blends and other roasts that their roaster have sold flying off the shelves faster than they would have liked, because they personally really were enamored with the lighter coffees. And so it's great to hear the focus on the consumer, because sometimes there's a lot of pressure to conform to what's going on around you. And you have proximity to some pretty cutting edge and of the moment coffee purveyors in your area in Southern California. And so, I mean, was there ever any pressure to really just push the roasting into where the quote unquote industry is going, in tension with where your customers were with their tastes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the challenges. And while there are many benefits to being very plugged into the coffee community, I think it can create a sort of echo chamber where there is that sort of peer pressure to want to stay, relevant and sort of push the boundaries of all the different things the very cutting edge coffee shops are doing with, say it's anaerobic coffees or, very light roast, Nordic roasting, and the, more at the front of pushing that third, fourth wave sort of coffee experience. And there is really pressure to sort of fall into that. But at the end of the day, I remind myself that, I've created a business model that works, and I want to continue to foster the sort of community that we've built, and not necessarily completely pivot to appealing to, the smaller minority of, say, baristas or niche, people who like that very sort of co-fermented coffees and very flavorful things and, very light roasts. I do actually like a lot of those things myself. And so I constantly will buy coffee from various shops to try and just to kind of have a rounded palate. But when it comes to my customers, I, know them because I spend time in the shop. I try to curate our roast to what I think they would enjoy.
Yeah, and it's worked out.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So you now, as somebody who has to navigate uncertainty in the business, because being your own boss is something that I think a lot of people dream about. They get into the idea that they're going to open a coffee shop and that's going to be like this dream scenario. And there's a lot of things that are uncovered in the process that are just maybe you didn't know that was going to happen. And it takes a certain toll on you. You've kind of got to lead yourself while also leading other people. So there's a whole team of people behind and with what you're doing. And I'm curious about your experience leading yourself and also leading others and not letting the uncertainties and stress of ownership bleed over into, in an unhealthy way, the culture and the curation of what you're doing with your staff. How do you lead them and yourself at the same time in a healthy way?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most difficult things I would say to navigate, especially as a business grows, is that you need to continually be elevating yourself as a leader and developing yourself, but also making sure to spend time with the staff to develop them, to kind of, create them into the people that you need to run the company that you are trying to create. And as we've scaled and we've opened multiple shops, and I've even opened another business on the side, it has become more difficult to sort of juggle so many different hats. And you are completely correct when you say that people sort of have this ideal about what it is to own a coffee shop, or I guess for owning many small businesses, I'm sure. But I would say coffee especially is very romanticized, because this culture has a fascination with cafes and coffee shops, but I don't think they see what goes into the day to day. For example, yesterday I was fixing some sort of plumbing leak and cleaning some busted water heater and fixing a broken fridge. And there's all these things that go into the day to day that are not going to be what someone's thinking of when they're imagining running a coffee shop. So yeah, there's that sort of romanticized element of it that I don't think is completely realistic. I would say it's something that people, I think, should spend time working in cafes if they are going to ever think of opening one, because it's scary how many people you see who have never worked in one, come up and talk to you. Maybe you get this too, but people who want to open a shop who have never even necessarily worked in one.
Yeah. And the fact that there are shops out there that exist where people did succeed under those conditions doesn't necessarily mean that you also are going to be that person. And I think you're alluding to this, that those lessons you learn working in coffee are going to help you in leading your people in those issues that are going to come up, inevitably going to come up. And maybe articulate for us a little bit of why you would say that about working in coffee. What edge does it give you as a leader that not working in coffee you just couldn't have?
I think it would for sure give you a more realistic approach of what the day-to-day kind of looks like, at least. And like you said, you don't need to have necessarily worked in coffee or owned a coffee shop. For example, we kind of started with, pretty limited knowledge. Yeah, I had worked in coffee, but we didn't necessarily know everything that went into opening a business, and we figured it out as we went. So it can be done. I would say, we're close to a testament to that. But I definitely think that you should work in coffee for at least a decent amount of time, maybe a year or something like that, maybe a little less, 6 months, at least to get a general experience of sort of what a daily grind looks like, at least from the perspective of a barista or, whatever other position you can sort of finagle your way into a shop.
So you finagle your way into a shop from this perspective of already having predicted that some of this stuff is going to happen. And it's not a shock to you. I imagine that is not going to throw you, which leads me to the second part of the question, which is that idea that people are looking to you to actually lead them and to have answers. Now, you're not going to have all the answers, but half of the reason why a coffee bar will succeed is based on leadership, if not more. We're all learning in different ways, at different facets of our life, how to be better leaders. And so what do you do that you find is the most effective as you grow your business that resonates most with your staff to be a good leader? What does that mean to you, and how do you work that out?
I think to be a good leader, you need to be willing to lead from the front and not be somebody who necessarily sits back and just dictates from a desk, like you do this, you do that. But I think there is a sort of respect that is gained when somebody can sort of be in the trenches with their staff and actually lead from the front, I would say. Like, for example, I still spend quite a bit of time on bar, on busy weekends or running food or helping in whatever way is needed. And I think there's a degree of respect that the staff has when they see the owner, kind of on the floor with them, taking that beating on the weekend. And it's, I think, a necessary thing if you want to be sort of respected by your staff. I don't think it's necessarily like 100% that you couldn't do it, if you didn't know how to, say, work the espresso bar. But I think it would open yourself up to getting taken advantage of and just being held hostage by employees if you yourself don't know, how to lead in every aspect of your business.
Talk more about that, being held hostage by your employees. What do you mean by that?
You see sometimes in some of these small businesses where you have an owner who kind of gets into it. Say somebody sort of dreamed of having a coffee shop, they had the resources and they opened it, and they don't themselves necessarily know how to be a high-level barista, roaster, cook, baker. So they sort of hire for all these positions and never really take the time to develop themselves in those areas, at least to a certain competency level. And what could happen is they can now down the line become so dependent on a particular employee that if something goes wrong with that employee and they begin to take advantage of the owner or not perform as well, the owner can feel trapped or held hostage by that certain employee because they themselves are not capable of filling that role if something goes wrong. And it can often be hard to hire a new roaster or a new general manager or a new, lead barista. So that's why I think if you are considering opening a shop, it is important to develop yourself, at least to a certain degree, in all the different areas of your business.
So you can be somebody who bridges the gap in the interim. You don't need to be the best barista, but you could need to know how to make a cappuccino and a sandwich, that kind of thing.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when I hear you talk about this, there's a narrative that, bosses in general are evil, and the owner, the leadership and everything else, where there is a lot of weight of responsibility with having authority in general. It kind of takes two to tango in a lot of cases. And I hear you talking about baristas that may have an overly developed sense of entitlement to a certain something in a business. And you hate to see it because there are people who will take advantage of a situation like that. I've seen it myself many, many times. That seems like a hiring thing. It feels like something that you would probably need to look out for in hiring. But also, how do you keep something like that from developing in the culture? So keeping a healthy culture, like I always think about toxicity in a business as something that may have started fine, but something that's fine that expires and eventually turns malignant started out fine. So what are the preventative maintenance pieces for culture that you find helpful to keep things on the up and up so that we don't have any kind of toxicity in the business, whether that's from baristas or managers and leaders?
I do think this is a very challenging aspect of the business. And I know this is something you kind of even gone into in some of your talks. And I think I listened to you in Anaheim, even kind of touching on some of those topics. And I will say it isn't an easy, silver bullet for solving all these problems. I wish it was, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed early as it comes up. And like you said, not to let it sort of fester and spread. And lately we've been having this little kind of joking sort of metaphor for that, where we've told our staff that you need to be like a coffee bean, in the sense that a coffee bean sort of, takes on or affects its environment. And, you put coffee into water, it turns the water into coffee. It sort of permeates out. And so your attitude and toxicity in general is kind of like a coffee bean, in the sense of the way you act in your shift with your company is going to permeate out and affect, your coworkers, the business, the customers. And so addressing toxicity and little like cultural challenges need to be done early on before it spreads, because, we've had it too, where things have gotten bad and you really have to then do a deep cleaning where you're spending a lot more time to re-polish up the environment than if you had just, done maintenance work, basically.
Well, that's really hard to do. I mean, I know you've done it. And so I'm not saying that you haven't done it, but, I talk to people about some of this stuff too, like you mentioned, and we really want to have the problem solved, but actually broaching the topic with the person, actually addressing it in the moment feels scary because you hear the stories, you like your coffee bar, things are okay, and maybe it'll go away.
I'm guilty of that. Complacency is a killer. Good is the enemy of great. It's just one of those things where, sometimes things are just okay or they're good enough. And then the next thing you know, you're just walking through ashes around you because you became complacent. So it's a dangerous thing.
Wow. That's apocalyptic. I love that imagery. So it's almost like you need to kind of generate a healthier fear of your own complacency than the awkwardness of actually having to do that kind of cultural work to keep things up.
There's a quote I recently heard from Shakespeare from the play Julius Caesar. It goes something like, "A coward dies 1,000 times before his death, but the valiant man only dies once."
Yeah.
And that quote is sort of a reminder to me that when you continually put things off, whether that's addressing that employee that is toxic or that issue that keeps coming up, but it's not that big of a deal, so you put it off, it begins to slowly eat at you. And it's sort of this concept of, death by 1,000 paper cuts, where you constantly have to relive this annoyance instead of just being brave and having that uncomfortable conversation right away and sort of nipping things in the bud as they come. And that's something that I've had to sort of remind myself when it's time to make that difficult decision, whether it's to fire an employee, have a talk. It's sort of that thing in my head. I'm like, you know what? The coward dies 1,000 times. Just go, just do it.
Yeah, that is something we see often in burnout with managers or with owners themselves. It's this cumulative trauma where the individual instance itself doesn't feel like it's doing anything until it does, until there's one, like you said, it's this accumulation. And I'm sure that mentality of braving what is this little micro battle enables you to create more wins, not just in times where you're needed in a boss to employee situation, but like you said, taking care of the plumbing, doing the preventative maintenance on your espresso machine, or opening up a roastery and bakery commissary that may cost a lot to do initially, but you're going to embrace the challenge of that or the unknown of that. So I've always heard confidence is a byproduct of bravery that is practiced maybe in lots of little ways. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. I think it's a universal in life where we have these fears, and the way you overcome them is to basically confront them. I mean, that's how, exposure therapy works for so many people who suffer from different phobias and whatnot. But I mean, it's true for all of us. Everything is scary until you just try it and you realize it's not as big of a deal as you think it is. It reminds me actually of when I was a kid, my first time going on a roller coaster. I was so terrified. I was kicking and screaming, and my dad made me go on this roller coaster. And I was just so absolutely thrilled after. I wanted to go on it 5 more times. But, it was just one of those things, you just, until you do it, you just don't know. And it's just a matter of taking action.
Boy, there's an analogy for business, a roller coaster, right? Perfect. Last question for you here is really just something that I want to know, because people are inundated with advice from all different angles. And that advice is usually related to how do I make a successful business, and how do I hack this, and how do I do that? But because of your angle and your mission and what you've been able to accomplish so far with your business in these 10 years to connect with humans, everything stems from that. So if we wanted to do the same thing as operators, as leaders, what advice would you have for running a great shop that also is a caring, vibrant culture to foster that human connection? What do we do?
I think it starts from within you and just having a genuine care towards others. I think it's something that's hard to fake. I think you could kind of copy and paste certain things, but at the end of the day, I think the consumer senses genuineness. And so I don't think there is a shortcut. It is a matter of creating the right environment. What does your shop look like that it does foster a sort of warmth or human connection to it? I think shop design comes into play. Then hiring, you can have all the best intentions, but if you hire, rude baristas, you're never going to build a caring, close-knit community. So it's really just the same principles of you have to be careful who you bring into your company's culture. And you have to be careful how you, approach your customers. Are you going to be, very particular? Like if somebody drops their drink, are you going to make them a new one for free, or are you going to like charge them for it? It's these little decisions that over time will determine whether you are truly a place that cares for its people, whether that's their staff. Do you offer a free drink or a meal for the vendor, for the guy dropping off the milk? It's like, can you truly be people forward in every aspect of your business? Or are you just kind of like faking it to the customer, and hoping that you can sort of con them into giving you their money? So
yeah, exactly. Because eventually that's going to crack, the conning them into giving their money, and the fake it till you make it kind of thing, or just putting on a mask of generosity doesn't replace having an actual genuine and generous spirit. So that very well said. Yeah.
That's a good word, generous spirit. I think if that's the approach you want to take, I think that's something you got to sort of foster in yourself, if you want it to come alive in your business.
Nice. Well, this was great, Nick. I appreciate you being on the show and sharing all of this. And I want people to go to your shop and experience it for themselves and buy your coffee. So where can we go to learn more about Tru Bru?
Yeah, you can check us out on our website, trubrewcoffee.com. It's spelled TRUBRU coffee.com. And then also on social media, Instagram. I think maybe we have a Facebook, but mostly just Instagram. And yeah, pretty much all the normal, channels. You could look us up and find us on there.
Nice. That's great. And for the record, I think so many people have said to me, I think we have a Facebook.
Yeah, it's just there existing.
Yes. Well, great to have you on the show again, Nick. I think so much of what you shared is going to be transformational, and I appreciate your story and what you stand for. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Nick. And Nick, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. It was great to learn from you and to hear your story. And one of the things that really stands out to me in this conversation is the idea that having a genuine care toward others and what you do and how you all conduct yourselves together in the work, it's essential in building that successful coffee shop. That idea creates vibrant culture, and it allows us to not fall into complacency, to always be taking action toward that value of people-focused service and genuine care. And that's the kind of thing that Tru Bru is based on and what drives Nick, and it's inspiring to us as well. So again, a huge thank you to Nick Kassouf for being on the show. If you're interested in learning more about Tru Bru organic coffee, you can go to their website over at Tru Bru Coffee. That's TRUBRU coffee.com. And Tru Bru Coffee on Instagram is just at Tru Bru Coffee. I would really hope that you go to their website, buy some roasted coffee. If you're in the area of Orange, California, Laguna Hills, or Henderson, Nevada, I hope that you get to go to one of Nick's shops and experience it for yourself. So if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode, I would really love to hear what you think and what those are. So email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS @keystotheshop.com. That's also where you can reach out for one-on-one coaching and consultation for you and your business through Keys to the Shop Consulting, and also to register your interest. Let's have a conversation about key holder coaching groups, these mastermind groups of coffee shop owners designed to bring you to the next level in your coffee shop, offer clarity, encouragement, accountability, and transformation for coffee shop owners. And so if you're interested in that, email chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. All of you who support the show, thank you so much. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.